Hello and welcome back into You Pods Win the Game. I am Jori Epstein here for Yahoo Sports with Charles McDonald, no longer a Charles-free show. C-Mac, how are you?
I'm doing good. I got back out to my first football practice yesterday since pre-vaccine pandemic. So that was pretty fun. It was good to get out to Giants practice, get some sun, see some of my old cohorts from the Giants beat, and it kind of feels like we're about to, get back into the swing of things, which that I'm a little unsure how to feel about, but getting to watch football in person is always a good thing.
Absolutely. No, I agree. And as you know, I was out at Jets practice yesterday while you were out at Giants. They let the kids go crazy, trusted us with the New York teams. We'll see whether or not they regret that decision. But I agree. It's kind of like the perfect of let's go watch football. We could watch all of practices, not just 15 minutes because it's that time of year. And then you still get the month off for the summer. So you'll still get your time to recharge before we fully get back into it.
Oh yeah. I was just thinking I think the last time I was at a Jets practice or game or something like that, just when I was up here week 2 against the 49ers, and Raheem Mostert, he took an 80-yard sweep on the first play of the game for a touchdown, and there's no fans in the stadium, right?
Yeah.
So they have like this mechanized thing, then they press the wrong button, and all of a sudden it sounds like MetLife erupted with cheers as Mostert's running down the sideline. And I remember I kicked back my chair and I looked up to the sky and I said, I can't come back here. Like there's no way. There's no way. So, and then, there a lot has changed because like last time I was out here, we had to, we were like on the Zoom calls, so the game would end, right?
Right.
And we're all just sitting in a row for, waiting for Adam Gase's time to come on the Zoom call. I'm just like, dude, like I could do literally all of this at home. There's no locker room access. I'm literally just going to watch the game, get the same access that I would have had from my couch. So it's good to get the normal reporting access that we got yesterday. And it's just good anytime I think you can get up off the couch and keep it moving.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I totally feel you on that COVID stuff. I actually was at Cowboys-Rams season opener 2020, the first game ever in SoFi Stadium. And there were 0 fans there. And it was wild. And I've now covered 3 games at SoFi. And going from Cowboys-Rams, no fans, to Cowboys-Chargers the next year, covered in fans, to Cowboys-Rams the third year. And the Rams fans that exist were there. Take for that what you may. It is a wild situation, but it definitely makes me more appreciative anytime we can have some even like inkling of in-person relationships and in-person access, because it makes a difference even just going out there and being like, okay, I kind of feel like I have like a little bit of a sense of what this team is aiming for. So I'm really glad we got back out there, and we'll get a bit more into it, give all of our listeners some reflections from those camps. But before we do that, let's go over some news. Jimmy Garoppolo with the Raiders now underwent foot surgery. Apparently, this was something that the Raiders knew when they signed him that he needed. The general public did not know that until last week. What went through your mind when you heard this, and how concerned should Raiders fans be, being that this is not Jimmy G's first injury?
It's not his first, it's not his second, it's not his third, it's not his fourth.
Will it be his last? You don't seem very convinced.
I don't know. It depending on how this plays out, it might be his last. I'm not talking. Wow, that sounded really bleak and dark.
Yes, as a man who's still struggling from the back injuries he suffered in college football.
Yeah, and it ends one day, and you still deal with it. But I think that I kind of struggle with some of the Jimmy G talk, because it's hard for me to just like bash a guy and say, oh, wow, he's always hurt. Blah, blah, blah. Well, of course he's hurt. He's playing football. Like that's kind of what happens when you play a lot of football.
100% injury rate.
Yeah. But at the same time, it's like, I do think Raiders fans have some room to get upset with like the front office, because, you pass on a quarterback at 7, which is fine in a world where Jimmy Garoppolo is healthy, right? Or like you passed up on the opportunity to even make a move for a guy at the top of the draft, because it seemed like, the 3 first-round quarterbacks were gone by pick 7. So you entered the draft okay with the idea of Jimmy Garoppolo as your quarterback. And this is a month after, if the timeline matches up, this is like a month or so after they had to delay his signing because his foot was still messed up. It's a bit careless. Because I tend to think that moving on from Derek Carr, Jimmy Garoppolo, it's not like too much of a difference. I don't think you're gonna get in production, but the one thing that Derek Carr has had is he's gonna play in just about every game for the Raiders, and that's has not been Jimmy G's mantra at all. Like, there's a reason why they went up to trade for Trey Lance and gave up all those first round picks, because he couldn't play. And there's a reason why Brock Purdy got to play last year, because Jimmy couldn't go after Trey couldn't go. So, like, the idea that he's hurt is not surprising at all. I think it's crazy that the Raiders didn't put themselves in a situation where they could kind of buffer this, because it's not like you have this super young team and Jimmy was going to be the guy to stabilize it. You got some real vets on that team. I mean, you still got Devontae Adams in his prime, and now there's like a non-zero chance that he's going to be playing with Brian Hoyer and Aiden O'Connell as his career starts to hit like that back nine, which has to be frustrating for like everyone involved.
Yeah, I think you can say, well, every team's got to rebuild and sort of create this bridge quarterback situation at some point. But if you do that, you don't trade for Devontae Adams. So what are you planning with here? I think you need to align your goals a little bit more, because your moves seem to be going for different strategies. Before I give you my full take, I want to know, do you think that if Jimmy G didn't have the background with Josh McDaniels for New England, he would currently be a Raider?
Oh, no. No.
Right. And that's where I think our problems come in, because I'm going to speak out of both sides of my mouth here, in the sense that I talked to Tom Brady today for a story, and we will discuss that. And among the things we discussed was how huge it is that Aaron Rodgers goes into the New York Jets. He knows the offense. He knows offensive coordinator and play caller Nate Hackett. And that's also great for his receivers like Randall Cobb and Alan Lazard, who came with him from Green Bay. I think you can make that work when your quarterback is Aaron Rodgers and one of the most talented, productive quarterbacks to play of all time. Jimmy G is not in that boat, even if he is good when healthy. And so I think when you start to make these decisions that are based off of comfort rather than potential and rather than what can we do, I don't know, like, I get that Josh McDaniels didn't have year one that he wanted, and he probably wants to have a quarterback in there that he can trust. But I think there are times when this league just becomes too much of a hire the guy you know, hire the guy who knows you and will stick up for you. And I think that can be really dangerous unless it's an Aaron Rodgers or a Tom Brady type.
Yeah, and I would say to Josh McDaniels, like, you know, if your comfortability is bringing you to a spot where you're you know, begging a quarterback to come in here who's never even played a full season outside of 2019, you might want to like look inward at what are you trying to accomplish here? Because I understand like the idea when people say or when coaches say, well, you know, he knows the system, so we're going to get a leg up on what we're working on here. But at the same time, like, a huge component of being a great coach is teaching.
Yes.
You know, it shouldn't be reliant on someone like Jimmy Garoppolo coming in for a seamless transition. Like, you should be able to be a bit more creative and look at your options to say, all right, well, let's say I get, you know, someone not named Jimmy G in here, and I get the options were kind of thin this offseason, especially as far as free agency quarterbacks go, but I should be able to teach that person the offense and get them to a spot where they can run it. It would be a little scary to me if I was a Raiders fan and I'm thinking, all right, we're already starting behind the eight ball, right? We don't have Patrick Mahomes. We don't have Justin Herbert. We don't have a great defense. You're like at that halfway point between, can we, if like,
I think we should add that they don't have Russell Wilson. I know that last year was right. But Russell Wilson and Sean Payton, I trust more than Josh McDaniels paired with Jimmy Garoppolo.
Yeah, I'm gonna be honest. I forgot the Broncos were in this division, so so thank you. But you know, like you're already starting from behind the eight ball, and now you're stuck in a spot where it's like, okay, with one good offseason, maybe we could win the division, but we're also like one bad offseason from needing to tear all of this down right now. And it kind of looks like that's where they're headed. I wonder where Devontae Adams is like right now looking at the situation, because it can't make him feel good knowing that he's as good as he still was last year. You know, it's still a dominant receiver. And now he's dealing with whatever is left of Jimmy G, because I think once you start dealing with like foot problems, that's a little bit scary as a quarterback. And then your other options are Brian Hoyer and a rookie who was drafted in the 4th round. It's pretty bleak, I think, with the Raiders quarterback situation right now.
And another interesting aspect here is that Miran Fader, an incredible reporter for The Ringer who does more NBA reporting than the NFL, but she did recently do a deep dive sitting down with Davante Adams. And one of the things that they discussed was that Davante Adams really felt like last year he could kind of solidify his reputation and his ability in the NFL, that yes, he loved playing with Aaron Rodgers. Yes, Aaron Rodgers is a fantastic quarterback who will elevate the receivers around him. But Davante Adams was an all-pro with the Raiders without Aaron Rodgers. And that was important to him just to know that he was able to elevate his team, not only be elevated by his team. Now that he's proven that, if he's also on a team where, okay, he doesn't have his college quarterback in Derek Carr anymore, he doesn't have that little chip on his shoulder, other chips, but not that one, you start to wonder, how much frustration is he going to show this year if they're really not giving him the tools to even be serviceable?
Yeah, dude, I would be throwing a hissy fit. Kidding me? I got what, 2, maybe 3 years left max of being the guy at this level. Get me out of here. I don't know how he's gonna handle it, but look, I feel like if this was 2004 or 2005, where you got the peak receivers saying whatever the hell they want and trying to force their hands at their own situations, I think he might be a little bit more vocal about what's going on, because this is not looking like it can be a sustainable, season for them, which, look, like we said before, Jimmy G is a fine quarterback, but it doesn't really matter if he's not playing or if he's banged up when he's on the field. So you're walking the tightrope here between competence and just complete irrelevancy if you're the Raiders. And that's not what you want to be when you're paying $30 million to your receiver. You need to be competing now, and I'm not sure that they will be.
Absolutely. And then the question becomes, well, if Jimmy G is not behind center, who is? Which leads us to a backup group of Brian Hoyer and Aiden O'Connell. And yes, for those wondering, Tom Brady is in the process, not yet finalized, but in the process of getting approval to own a limited stake in the Raiders. But when I talked to him this morning, we did discuss this. And he also told Sports Illustrated, I am certain I am not playing again. So don't expect him to come back. I kind of tried to poke it a little bit by being like, hey, Jimmy, you got to still know Josh McDaniel's system pretty well. Like, how much do you think about that? And he didn't try and go there. He wasn't like, oh, yeah, I could step in. He said, I was part of Josh's system for a very long time. He and I have an incredible working relationship, and I know Jimmy very well, too. And he started to talk about how he's pulling for Jimmy. So Raiders fans should not hold their breath that Tom Brady is going to come save the day in November, December. And quite frankly, by the time it would be relevant, I don't even think the Raiders will have a record that's able to be saved. And so then it's like, what are you going to do? Sacrifice your body and your family balance when you've already sacrificed quite a bit to come out of retirement? I don't think it's happening. He told us it's not happening. But you are a draft expert. So Aiden O'Connell, this 4th round pick that they drafted, where is he right now? What can he do for the Raiders? And are you starting with Brian Hoyer, then transitioning to O'Connell if Jimmy's not healthy? If you're quarterback's coach, your offensive coordinator, C-Mac, how are you handling this roster?
I'm giving Aiden a clipboard and saying it don't matter unless you come out in training camp and kind of blow away our expectations. I don't really see a way that he factors into the quarterback room this year. And if he does, like, things have gotten pretty bad. I mean, he was a 4th round rookie, right? Like, there's only so much expectation you can have on someone like that. And it's one of those situations where it's like, if he were get in the game and play poorly, it's like, well, yeah, that's what 4th round rookies do. But you got Jimmy G, we're already in shaky waters there. Brian Hoyer, certainly not someone who's going to man down a spot for a long time. So maybe Eddie can play, but it's not even like he was a super toolsy guy coming out of Purdue. It's just solid college quarterback, play a lot of games, and maybe in a couple of years he can be a guy that, if he has to play for 2-3 games, it doesn't ruin our whole season. But starting off, that's a tough spot to put a guy like that in.
Yeah. Well, good luck to the Raiders fans.
Yeah.
And not too far from them out west, we had the Arizona Cardinals last week releasing wide receiver DeAndre Hopkins. Now, it was definitely trending like Hopkins was not going to play for the Cardinals. He made very clear, very publicly, that he didn't want to. The Cardinals are unapologetically in this rebuild year, save the money. But the fact that he was released rather than traded surprised me. And actually, it's funny. A side note is that some people know I'm a practicing observant Jew, and so on Saturdays I'm off the grid for 25 hours, and on Jewish holidays my phone is off. And so it was a holiday last week from Thursday night to Saturday night, so I completely missed this news. And then I didn't check everything right away, and I get back online on Sunday, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Hopkins is released, and I was just cracking up of just not knowing that this happened for multiple days. But were you surprised that they released him and couldn't find a trade partner? And where do you think he's going, C-Mac?
Okay, I would say if it was any other team than the Cardinals, I might be a little surprised they couldn't find a trade partner because from what
shots fired,
but what they don't have a roster. I'm not scared of them.
Right, they don't have the leverage. You mean?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think if they're at a point where, look, I think from what we read, it seems like they're probably asking a little bit too much for Hopkins in the trade, but you already had the offseason where you didn't really sign any free agents, not any that's going to make a real impact for this year. Maybe that's by design. Maybe it's a first-year GM and head coach kind of being a little over heads. We'll see, down the line how that works out. But you have that free agency period. You have third pick in the draft. You trade down, acquire assets for next year. You have the Texans' first-round pick next year, which could still be as high as the number 1 pick in the draft, right? You're clearly tanking, or you're clearly reshuffling the deck so you can try and
T-word.
Jumpstart this next year. Why not just take any pick that you can get for DeAndre Hopkins? Why are you cutting him and then paying off the salary?
Get a 5th rounder, get a 4th rounder,
get a 7th rounder, anything, because their roster is so barren right now that I don't think they can sneeze at almost any type of asset that they could have gotten for a DeAndre Hopkins trade. And I think if the reports of them asking for a 2nd round pick are true, that's insane. He's missed a lot of time over the past 2 years. It's not even it's even different from when the Falcons traded Julio, because at least that last year Julio was with the Falcons, you could look at the 8 games he played and say, okay, that was still Julio Jones for the most part. With DeAndre Hopkins, we're 2 years removed from the last time he had a big time impact season. So asking for a 2nd, I understand the name power with DeAndre Hopkins. I understand how much you're paying him. That doesn't mean that he's worth a 2nd round pick anymore. And I think, just to bring back the T word, the tanking word, if you're going to cut him, right, and then eat the dead cap on a bad roster, that to me is the final nail in the coffin that you guys aren't even really attempting to be serious about 2023. Because I think if you were, you probably would have tried to be a little bit more a little more savvy with this than you were. And I think that it's a little disappointing that they just kind of cut him loose and are giving this season to Cardinals fans.
Yeah, I do think, though, I respect what the Cardinals are doing. I know that for 2023, it doesn't look good, but I've said several times on this podcast before that I think one of the biggest things that hurts teams in the NFL is when they think they're better than they are and they make decisions accordingly. And the Cardinals are we know we're not there. We know we need to change some things. We don't know where we are with our quarterback. And our colleague Charles Robinson wrote a column about that of maybe Kyler Murray's not going to be there much longer. And they're just taking all of their hits from a draft standpoint, from a salary cap standpoint, from a roster standpoint this year. And it's actually going to give them a lot of flexibility in 2024. Now, if you are Jonathan Gannon, who just took this head coaching job and was coming from being the Eagles defensive coordinator, good luck to you motivating your team this year. I'm not saying he won't. He was hired to do that. And by all accounts, he's a very motivational guy, but it's going to be hard to get the guys up this year, especially some of the ones look, Budda Baker, he didn't want to be on a losing team. So we should keep an eye on what's happening there, but I don't think you have. Yeah.
It sucks. Yeah. And it's awful when you go into a game and you don't have a chance to win. And
right.
And do you know how hard it is for with all the parity legislation that they've tried to put into the NFL to get a team bad enough where everyone's I don't know about you guys serious about this one? We're actually going forth with this. I think the only saving grace in the Cardinals offseason is the draft. They kind of knocked that out of the park. you get a franchise tackle, you get the Texans pick for next year. You're kind of balling. But I think when you look at the free agency situation and the Hopkins stuff, there's a little bit of a red flag at how things are being run here. So yeah, I don't know what's gonna happen with Kyler Murray, but Cardinals fans, like, this is one of those situations where you find a secondary team for the year, okay? Or you just start watching Red Zone, because by like week 4, you're gonna be out on this. I promise you. I promise you. And that's fine. We've all been there with our favorite teams before. I've been there with the Falcons before. I'm not there anymore. My team has good players on it, and I hope you get there too.
Wow. Well, what a pep talk. So, as hopefully everyone listening here knows, Charles has a column during the season called Meet Me at the Logo. And I'm just picturing right now, let's send the Raiders fans and the Cardinals fans to all meet at the Logo. They can sort of create the support group, maybe decide, hey, like, we're going to acknowledge the Jaguars. We're going to pick the Lions. Like, pick another team who is not only exciting this year, but also a reminder that even if you were really bad a couple years ago, you too have hope for the future.
Yeah. And, if you're a Cardinals fan, hopefully, you don't go 1-31. You draft a dud quarterback at first overall, and then you have to make an ethical decision on trading for another one. Hopefully that doesn't happen to you,
Yes. Best of luck. Okay. Last part of this. DeAndre Hopkins, where's he going? And is he making this decision based off, I want to go win a championship? I've spent a lot of time in Houston, a lot of time in Arizona. I just want to be on a good team. Is he wanting to be paid what he's worth? He did hire an agent in Kelton Crenshaw that I thought was an interesting move, because he negotiated his last contract by himself. But I think it's a reminder of, like, maybe Lamar Jackson's no agent thing isn't actually the preferred way to go, even if ultimately he turned out fine.
Yeah, and I think for DeAndre Hopkins, it's different negotiating for yourself when you are DeAndre Hopkins at your peak, right? And
great point.
The Texans have the Cardinals have traded for you, and you have the leverage, right? But it's different when you're DeAndre Hopkins 2 years removed from your best seasons, and now you're back out on the trade market, or not on the trade market, but free agency market. You might need someone to make connections for you between teams, to negotiate a contract for you, because DeAndre Hopkins might not know what a contract for himself looks like right now. And I think it might be helpful for someone to help guide him through that, because when he gets that $5 million a year offer or $10 million a year offer, he's probably going to scoff at that. And then it's kind of helpful to have someone, rein you back in, just as far as that's concerned. But I think he's going to end up on a contender. If I was him, dude, I'd be sprinting to try to get to Kansas City. You could be the top dog at receiver there. And it's more of a, this is how young Kansas City's receivers are, but he could come out, be the wide receiver 2, maybe, to Travis Kelce. And that could still be a really productive season for him. So Kansas City, Buffalo, there's been some rumblings about Cleveland too, because he had a lot of success with Deshaun Watson back in Houston. So I think those are the 3 probably to watch out, just like everyone else has been saying.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think go to a contender. That's why you make a move this way. And for those wondering if the New York Jets would add yet another receiver to this group that already has Aaron Rodgers, among others, Robert Saleh told us that even though he was in on Odell Beckham Jr., they're now at a point where they love their guys. They love their group. Classic coaching. But I don't think he's gone to the Jets.
Yeah, okay. Well, Dable was asked about it yesterday at Giants practice. He kind of said, we'll said, or not directly, but kind of said we'll look into it a little bit. But I don't know if they're actually going to press the gas on adding Hopkins to their team.
Where I think for the Giants, Hopkins maybe has even more potential than the Jets, and maybe is a better fit. But if you're Hopkins, did you just leave Arizona to go to the Giants? You would have an awesome coach in Brian Dable, a great coordinator in Mike Kafka, but the roster's not quite there. So I think if he gets an offer from a Chiefs or Bills, there's a reason he's playing this game. C-Mac, we were both out at practices yesterday. You were out at Giants. I was out at Jets. Who stood out to you in a practice where the media can watch a little bit more than we'll be able to during the regular season? And also talk to us about what Kayvon Thibodeaux said yesterday, because you wrote a great article on his comments.
Yeah, we got Thibodeaux after practice for some media availability, and he's a fun guy. Like, he's one of those guys that it's like, oh wow, it's not just a helmet with a visor on. Like, there's a real funny person that has a lot of depth and a lot that they're thinking about underneath that. And, he's a guy that he thinks big, man. He's got a lot of big plans for himself. He wants to be a GM. I know he's got a big financial goals off on the side that he's been working on. But, he was kind of talking about how you have these big plans, right? And sometimes you need to just scale back to actually accomplish what you're trying to figure out. So I think he gave a good example when he was talking about his rookie year when he said, I had a goal for a number of sacks I wanted to get done. I didn't hit that. But he said one thing he learned throughout the season is you got to take it one game at a time, right? You can't be, I'm so focused on hitting 10 or so sacks that I kind of lose sight of what I'm actually to accomplish here, which is being a good, well-rounded football player. So he talked a little bit in depth about what he was trying to get better as a pass rusher, how he's trying to improve his mentality so he doesn't kind of get lost in the process as year two goes on. So he sounds like he's focused, ready to go. And I think that he's a guy that could probably really explode this year because I think when you look at his sack total from last year, it's 4, but it doesn't really tell the whole tale of how impactful he actually was as a player. And look, man, there's a big difference between going from Pac-12 offensive lineman to, I got to go against Andrew Thomas, every day of the week in practice. It's a bit different. So Evan Neal yesterday, and they both seem like guys who are kind of, ready to attack year two and be more productive than they were as rookies. But those guys are linemen, right? So when you're going to OTAs practice and the non-contact stuff is going on, there's not really too much that you can glean from a lineman perspective. So, I think when you're watching these practices, 7-on-7, where they're throwing the ball is usually where you can get the most amount of information. Darren Waller, man. Woo! Like, I know he's a good player, but there's just something about seeing him. And I think the athleticism really pops when you can play when no one can really touch you, right? So, he's out there. He's the biggest person that they have on the field because, there's no lineman on the field. So it's just quarterback, running back, tight ends, receivers, linebackers, defensive backs. He's the biggest person on the field. He's also the fastest person on the field, outside of maybe like a Dory Jackson. So he looks like he's in great shape. They have plans to use him all over the offense. Can't really talk about too much because I don't want an angry text from them, saying, why are you blowing up our plans? But I will say they got big plans for him this year. He looks like he's in great shape. He's already got some pretty crazy chemistry with Daniel Jones, especially with some of the red zone work that they were doing. So I think if I was a Giants fan, like that's where I would start to get really excited because he looks like he's on a mission this year.
That's awesome to hear. Right, because even though the scenarios that players find themselves during the season are pretty unlike the soft practices that they have to have now if they don't want to be fined, the reality is you got to have that chemistry and you got to have that trust with the quarterback. And if you don't have it, you're not getting the ball. So I think that though the plays won't be reflective, what they do now actually really does set the tone. And hey, like that's why a guy like Aaron Rodgers is at practice right now, even though he knows how to throw the ball, because you're building that relationship. And Darren Waller was definitely one of the sneaky acquisitions that the Giants made this year. And I think he's got a lot of potential. Again, it comes down to the health, but I love what he can do. At the Jets practice, it was almost like what wasn't happening was the biggest story, which is that Aaron Rodgers was not participating in practice. He is still limited with the calf that he tweaked. So he's kind of like on the bike, and then he was throwing flat-footed and watching drills. But similar to what you said, the 7-on-7 really stood out. Zach Wilson was having a good day. As you mentioned, it's just a good setting for tight ends and particularly just bigger-bodied pass catchers generally to succeed. And Aaron Rodgers was clapping along as Zach Wilson was finding these guys in the end zone. He was also giving a lot of tips. And the story ended up writing kind of contrasted how peaceful and almost normal Jets practice felt, despite the fact that The Athletic dropped a story that morning with Rodgers just blasting the Packers front office and being like, yeah, I talked to people that I like, when asked why he and Brian Gutekunst did not have communication toward the end. So I don't know how he chose to make those comments or what the mindset was. But at least on its face, and again, this is from watching 2 hours of practice, interviewing 3 different coaches and 3 different players, The Jets do not seem bothered by those comments that Rodgers had come out with against the Packers. And if anything, I'm like, hey, maybe I'm not saying that that's the approach I would take, but maybe it's the catharsis he needs of like, say it, be done with it. Now move on with the Jets. Say it while you're not practicing. Now Friday, he should be ready to get back into practice full go. They're going to ease him back in, but by Friday of this week and into next week, head coach Robert Saleh expects him to practice. So I thought that was a pretty interesting dichotomy because what was going on at practice did not reflect sort of the craziness of the NFL news cycle surrounding him yesterday.
Yeah, and I'll just say this from my time covering that team, they don't care, man. Like that, Aaron Rodgers coming out and blasting people who are not on the Jets is a very low tier Jet story. Like they've had a lot worse stuff happen, over their timeline. So I don't think that they care. I think that they just want Aaron to do whatever he needs to do to mentally get ready for this season because. I think one of the interesting things is when you look at the Jets cap space for next year and you factor in the fact that they don't have a Quinnen Williams deal done yet, you're kind of looking at this like a 1-year window. Like we got to get this done this year or we might have to blow it up again next year. Because
right.
As things are standing right now, according to Spot Track, they have about $160,000 in cap space for next year projected. So that's obviously going to cut some depth out of your roster, especially if you're serious about keeping Quinnen Williams at the rate that he's going to demand, which is about $25 million a year. You got to get this thing done this year. So, Aaron, whatever you need to say, whatever you need to feel, whatever you need to do, as long as you're ready for 303 touchdowns, week 1, you got it. And they haven't had a quarterback in so long, they'll let Aaron kind of stretch the limits on what's possible there.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And boy, do they love him there. I know it's honeymoon phase. I know that they haven't lost a game yet, and that could change everything. But you have Breece Hall, the running back who's going into his second year, being like, Aaron's such a jokester. We make fun of each other all the time. We have all these inside jokes. We went and got pizza. We went to the playoff hockey game. He was excited that he could walk around the streets of New York without being recognized because he hasn't been able to do that in a million years. And I'm like, this seems a little more lighthearted than at least my impression from afar was of the Rodgers we saw the last few years in Green Bay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think it's also just nice when you can get a location reset sometimes, I think. And like you said, you're in the honeymoon phase. You're experiencing what it's like to live in North Jersey and New York City for the first time. And I can imagine as someone who has made millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars in their career, living in New York City is probably very fun right now. So look, I'm glad we get to see this kind of Aaron because I think it's kind of a reminder that, oh wait, like before he got weird, like people liked him. Like we all liked Aaron before. So I hope that he can kind of get back to his old self and playing good ball because look, those Jets fans are rabid. And if he can deliver something like pretty big to them this season, he's going to be immortalized forever.
Absolutely. And C-Mac, I want to talk about your 5 free agents who can help teams, whether Jets or others. But first, let's throw it quickly to our ad break. So coming back into Pod to Win the Game, C-Mac, you wrote a piece last week, 5 unsigned free agents who could still help your team. We've got running back Ezekiel Elliott, wide receiver Kenny Golladay, edge rusher Leonard Floyd, defensive lineman Matt Ioannidis, and tight end Mercedes Lewis. How did you go about picking these 5? Take us through what your mindset was writing this article, and then we'll drill down on each of the players as well.
Well, it's May. And well, it was May. Today's June 1st. Yeah. But no, I think that, as we just talked about DeAndre Hopkins, so I wrote this before he got cut because obviously he would have been at the top of this list. But, I think that as you start to get to the summer, there's usually guys, that got cut earlier in the year. They're just still kind of waiting around to join teams. And some of those guys are valuable players to have like in the right roles. And I think that all these guys can end up helping teams, even if it's not in like a premier type of way. The Kenny Golladay one, I just have a hard time believing that that's it for him, you know? And that's really the only reason why he's on here. Because I went back and watched just a couple cut-ups for, like, from his Lions days. Man, like, he was really good. Like, I get why Dave Gettleman threw that contract at him on the way out before he gets fired from being the Giants GM, but there was almost like no production from that duo with the Giants and Kenny Golladay. And I think, you know, by the end of it, you know, you see him getting replaced by guys like Isaiah Hodgins and Wan'Dale Robinson, and none of those guys have ever had the impact in the NFL that Golladay has. So I don't know, like, what team would fit. Maybe the Cardinals, and maybe they just chuck it up to him and let him get a little empty season. But to me, he's one of those guys, and I feel the same way about how you brought up Russell Wilson early, where you've played enough good football. It's kind of hard for me to think that that's just it. So if I needed a quick, like, big wide receiver fix, I think I would call Kenny Golladay, because, you know, it's going to be a 1-year deal. It's not going to be too expensive, and he's still a guy that's played a lot of good football in the past.
Yeah, I love how you started that section by just being like, look, man. Like, literally, everyone knows that Galladay's tenure with the Giants was a failure. He was one of the most ineffective receivers. Yeah, you make a good point that when you've seen a player play at that level, at the highest level of the game, like, there's something there. I actually kind of feel that way about Zeke, but even more so because Kenny Golladay, at least you could make, like, devil's advocate, it would be, well, he hasn't done it in a few years. Is he going to be able to get back to it? What can he do? And then you have a guy like Ezekiel Elliott, who I obviously was with in Dallas for those 7 years. And I get that he's not as efficient as he used to be. He averaged 3.8 yards per carry last year. His first season below 4 yards per carry. This is very different from the 5.1 he had as a rookie when he was still getting 108.7 yards per game. I mean, he led the league in yards per game for 3 straight years to enter the league. But my thing is, this is a guy who still had 12 rushing touchdowns last year. Last year, not 5 years ago, not 4 years ago. He had 10 the year before. He had double digits 3 of the last 4 years. So I'm kind of like, I think that him being signed is not reflective of the NFL no longer thinking he can help the team. It's more teams, I guess, don't feel a rush relative to the running back market right now to get at him now rather than training camp. But I would be shocked if Zeke is not on a roster in 2023. And I would be extremely surprised also if he wasn't contributing, like, maybe that 6, 7, 8 touchdowns rather than a 12 if he's in a more limited role. But he had 12 touchdowns last year while sharing the carries with Tony Pollard, who obviously was a more explosive back while Zeke was more of the power back. And in goal line situations, he's really, really effective. So it'll be interesting to see where he lands and how much of this is about team didn't offer him what he thought he was worth when he left the Cowboys. I know some people like to say, like, maybe he'll end up back in Dallas. Dak would love to have him. He's not ending up back in Dallas.
Why not, though? That's what I was about to ask you. Why not?
Why not? Because, like, they've decided they moved on. Like, they don't want to move on from players like Zeke. So when they do, it's like, this is where we're at. I think that it's kind of just like new gear. I mean, look.
I can make a case for why they should re-sign Zeke.
I actually don't think, it's not that I don't think he should end up there. It's that I don't think this front office will. And once they get stubborn about something, I think they stay pretty stubborn. And I'm actually pretty surprised at how stubborn they've been about he's not coming back. But make your case and then I'll respond.
Okay. Malik Davis, Deuce Vaughn, Ronald Jones, Rico Dowdle. You go.
Wow. Mic drop. If the mics that they gave us weren't so expensive, I would drop this one. I think that you're actually forgetting the biggest part of that case, which is that Tony Pollard broke his leg at the end of January.
You need some insurance, man. Like,
they do need insurance. And I think they need and could use Zeke. I also will always be a believer that Zeke's pass protection drastically improves Dak's game, and that the way he gets the offense lined up does raise all tides? Is that the expression? Stone, what do you got for us?
Rising tide raises all boats.
Rising, yeah. Zeke's raising the boats. That's all you got to know. You got
two Americas.
But I don't know. I just think that then why did they cut him, I would ask? Because he said he'd take a pay cut.
How much of a pay cut, though?
That's the question.
I think I can see it from their point of view. Like, you cut because you don't want to pay him what he's worth. And maybe the pay cut
You want
wasn't.
Tony to be the guy.
Yeah, I see. That's where I kind of struggle with this, because to me, Tony is like the perfect like 1A in a backfield. But I don't know if Tony's the guy that can get 300 plus touches in a season and have that be a sustainable model for him. And I just really like the way Tony and Zeke complement each other, like this version of Zeke, because I think they both kind of need each other in ways where, look, I don't want Tony Pollard sitting in the A gap and hitting a blitzing linebacker straight up in the chin. And I'm also not trying to throw wheel routes to Zeke, right?
Oh my gosh, but they sure did.
yeah, they did. But I don't know if this is going to happen, but I do wonder if like once we get into training camp, because that's when you also start to see some of these veteran signings get knocked off. Like once camp starts and teams are like, oh, whoa, we way overestimated what we had in this guy at this position. I wonder if they're going to look at this and say, okay, maybe Ronald Jones, like in a right world, can be your RB2, but it didn't happen for him in a multitude of stops now. And even like in Kansas City, where that's a backfield where you really could be able to separate yourself from the rest of the guys, and it didn't kind of happen. Deuce Vaughn, that was a great story, but my man is like 5'5". I don't know if like
what do you got against those short people?
Not short people. I'm just saying like the best one ever, Darren Sproles, even he was never like a full-time starting running back. So I think you just need a little bit of a buffer. They're a little bit too green for me behind Pollard. And I think Zeke would make a big difference there. But like you said, you're way more informed than I am. So I'm just going to say, Jerry, if you're listening to this, which I know you definitely are, you just heard the case. You just heard the case. All right. Help Dak bring his bud back and go win a Super Bowl.
No, I mean, it's really true. When you look at Ronald Jones over the last 2 years, in the last 2 years, he had 498 yards and 5 touchdowns. In the last 2 years, Zeke had, how about 1,878 yards and 22 touchdowns? Like, that's not even close. And so if you're getting Zeke with anywhere close to a price, then I don't know what you were doing. And when we have this conversation, does it make you question the Cowboys' offensive chances even more this year? Because, like, you need a run game to be able to have a pass game in the NFL, I believe.
I get the analytics stuff, but, I also don't think that, like, public analytic data encompasses enough where you can account for the 22 guys who are moving all over the field. So I still think that Zeke is an important player to have. And look, even if it's just in a role where Tony's a full-time guy, right? We're going to have Tony, Dak, our receivers. They're going to get us close to the end zone. And once we get there, Zeke, battering ram, go punch it in. I don't think that's a bad strategy.
Points every time.
That's what I'm saying. And for what? A vet minimum contract in August? It's not bad production to have. Just think about it, Cowboys. Just think about it. Because I do think that's the best spot for him, actually, of all the teams that are left.
You've actually convinced me that if you can convince Jerry, I think I was already convinced it would be good. You've convinced me it makes like a lot of sense. Now, maybe that's also a reason to believe that the Cowboys don't do it, because they don't often do things that make a lot of sense. But the last thing before I move on is that what if Jerry, always the creative businessman, goes, hey, we'll give you a minimum contract for games, but how about this endorsement deal that you and your agent Rocky Arsenault can go, and then you end up getting the money. There's still some level of respect. It's just not coming out of the salary cap. Oh, and by the way, you don't have state taxes.
Great point. You already live here. Come on.
Yeah. All right. Moving on. Edge rusher Leonard Floyd, defensive line Matt Ioannidis. Let's take the defensive linemen together. Charles, former defensive lineman. What can these guys still offer, and where will their services be of use this year?
First, I'll go with Matt Ioannidis real quick. Like, I don't think he's a guy that's going to, even be really a starter at this point. But I think anytime you're just looking at veteran bodies on the defensive line that can play a lot of snaps and not be a total disaster, right? Maybe you're not getting up the field and getting 8 to 10 sacks, but like you're not getting blown off the ball either. So I think that he's a guy that can play a role like that. And have you looked at the Rams front seven depth chart? Because look,
I'm
I love football.
Aaron Donald can't do it alone.
Maybe he can, but I love football, right? I mean, this is something that I obsess over all the time, and I didn't know who the people outside of Aaron Donald were, excuse me, in the Rams defensive line and linebacker core was. I had no idea who these people were. So
do you know how to spell Kobe Turner's first name?
Is this C Kobe or K Kobe?
Is this K Kobe? Is there a C Kobe?
There is there was a Kobe. There was a Kobe who was from Wake Forest who got drafted this year, but I think this one is COBY, right?
This is from Wake Forest, and he's KOBIE.
Oh, okay.
I didn't mean to put you on the spot, and I'm actually really impressed you knew Wake Forest. The bigger point is that if Charles, king of the defensive linemen, doesn't know your defensive lineman, it's because they haven't done much yet. We're not saying that they won't do anything yet, but this is some unproven talent, folks.
Yeah, and I like Kobe's tape, but he's also like a rookie, so you can only depend on him so much. And the Rams, like, they're kind of in the same spot where the Raiders are to a degree, where it's like, okay, we kind of need to win now again, because Sean might not stick around for another bad year. The clock's ticking on Stafford. Aaron Donald's hitting his early to mid 30s. We kind of need to win now. So I think that someone like Matt Ioannidis, who can play a lot of spots up front, basically anywhere from like head up on a center to head up on a tackle, that's a good spot for him to land with the Rams. And then kind of sticking with the Rams, Leonard Floyd is one of those guys that when I was putting this together, I was like, wait, he's still a free agent? I thought he was like good recently. And my memory had not failed me, because last year with the Rams, he played and started all 17 games. He had 9 sacks, 10 tackles for losses, 22 quarterback hits, which was the most in his career. And he's only going to be 31 this season. So it's not even like this is one of those guys where he could fall off a cliff like any second. I think he probably still have a year of good production left. So I was a little surprised. He's had 29 sacks over 3 years with the Rams. He started 50 games. He started and played in every single game for the Rams since he's played there. Never had fewer than 9 sacks. I am very surprised that he is on the open market. And that's one of those players where what team doesn't need a pass rusher? So it's kind of even hard to nail that down for him.
Right. Yeah. I think the Rams not keeping him was really just a matter of like they got rid of most expensive and above average players as they retool and reset their roster. If he would take the pay cut, I think they would have him back. I haven't talked to the Rams about this, but just in terms of like it makes sense. But it would have to really make sense from a financial standpoint, because and commit to one strategy, either rebuild or don't. And they even said Kevin Demoff, their COO and president, basically wrote a letter to the fans being like, we still care, even as we're also not maximizing our resources. Take that as you may. Maybe the T word is relevant again. All right. Last one on this list, tight end Mercedes Lewis. What do you got for us?
I mean, he's your 6th offensive lineman type of guy. I know that the Aaron was kind of pushing for him.
Quintessential 6th offensive lineman per your story.
That's
Charles
right.
is using big words on us.
That's right. Not going to catch, not going to run any routes, but if you need, he's kind of like your goal line back of tight ends, right? Which is useful in its small role. I kind of think the Packers should bring him back. I know that they just drafted 2 guys, but I think that you're in a position where you would like Jordan Love to have the best rookie year that he can have, the best year that he can have. And I think relying on 2 rookie tight ends, where we know that that's a spot that's historically tough to transition to pretty early on, it might help this to have another big body in the room, and it wouldn't cost much at all. So Mercedes up to returning and kind of taking his lumps with a young quarterback, I think it makes a lot of sense there.
Yeah, we talked about a similar strategy with the Bears, being that until you got Justin Fields, the offensive lineman, to just stay upright, how can you really know what you have here? And the Packers know very clearly, within 2 years at most, they need to know, is Jordan Love the guy or not? So I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense of getting that protection. Awesome. Well, that is the full list of Charles's 5 players. Go check it out on yahoosports.com. You can check out also the Kayvon Thibodeaux report straight from the field. that Charles wrote at Giants camp. You've got my Aaron Rodgers reports from Jets camp. And I will also have a Tom Brady story dropping later today and another one next week. I talked to him Thursday morning, so stay tuned for the video and story on that. Tom Brady talking Aaron Rodgers. You might know both quarterbacks switched teams late in their career with Super Bowl aspirations. So what can we expect from Aaron Rodgers? C-Mac, anything else you want to plug before I take us out?
No, I think we're switching places next week, right? I'll be a Jets and then you'll be a Giants. So I'm excited to see what we're looking at this time next week. And outside of that, no, I think we're gonna try to have as cool a summer as we possibly can before we start ratcheting it up in late July and August. So that's all I got.
Cool summer. Awesome. Well, thanks for sticking with us. As we've said recently, we're now going weekly on Thursdays for the next week so we can catch the news cycle. Again, a lot happened this week that we were able to discuss because of this. I am at Jori Epstein on Twitter. C-Mac is at 4Verts, and our star producer behind the glass, Stone, is at SJ Rochelle. Help us keep Therese Paylor's legacy alive. Go to breakingtea.com/Therese for the all juice tea or hoodie. Support the Therese Paylor scholarships as well at Howard U and Mizzou directly. And for our other colleagues, please check out our NBA podcast, Ball Don't Lie, new podcast featuring Vince Goodwill, Jake Fisher, Dan Devine, and Kristen Peak, as well as our new MLB podcast, Bandwagon, featuring Hannah Kaiser and Zach Kreiser, both available wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us 5-star reviews, tell a friend, leave C-Mag and I 5-star reviews, and tell C-Rob you missed him, but you thought we did a great job. And we will see you all next Thursday. Thanks for listening.